Wait, you're putting that inside me? The lonely cowboy. First froze, but the giant mail-order bride smiled and said, "Trust me, you were made to handle this." Wait, you're putting that inside me? Thaddeus Merriweather's voice cracked with pure terror, his eyes wide as saucers, staring down at what his giant mail-order bride Magnolia was holding in her massive hands on their wedding night. But the lonely cowboy froze completely, his finger pointing and trembling, his whole body locked up with fear at what she was about to do. Magnolia just smiled, that big, beautiful, knowing smile that lit up her whole face, and said in her honey-sweet Georgia drawl, "Trust me, darling, you were made to handle this." The lonely cowboy looked like he'd seen a ghost, mouth hanging open in shock, but his giant mail-order bride wasn't backing down, wasn't laughing at his terror, wasn't making him feel small for being scared. But let me tell you how these two broken souls ended up in this moment, standing in a lamplight bedroom on Redemption Ridge, Montana, with everything they'd ever feared about love hanging in the balance between them. 3 months earlier, Thaddeus Merriweather had been the loneliest man in Montana territory. At 34 years old and standing just 5'6" in his boots, he'd spent the last 3 years hiding from life after watching his wife Martha bleed to death trying to birth their daughter. Both gone in one terrible night. The midwife had said Martha was too small, too delicate for childbearing, but Thad had loved her anyway, had gotten her pregnant anyway, and now he carried that guilt like stones in his pockets. Every day felt like drowning. Every night he woke up gasping, reaching for a woman who wasn't there anymore. The other ranchers had tried to help at first, bringing casseroles, offering prayers, suggesting he needed to move on, find himself a new wife. But how do you move on when you're convinced your love kills everything it touches? So Thad had buried himself in work, talked to his horses more than people, and figured he'd live out his days alone on this God-forsaken ridge where the wind never stopped howling. Then, one Sunday after church, Widow Henderson cornered him again with her daughter Prudence, a perfectly nice girl who looked at Thad like he was a charity case that needed fixing, and something inside him just snapped. That very afternoon, sitting at his kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a 6-month-old copy of the Matrimonial News, Thad did something crazy. He wrote a letter. Not to just any woman, but to one specific advertisement that had caught his eye months ago and stuck in his mind like a burr. Woman of uncommon stature seeks gentle man with kind heart and steady hands. Must not be afraid of strength in a wife. Thad had figured uncommon stature meant she was maybe tall, maybe touched 5'8". What he didn't figure was that Magnolia Thorngate would step off that stagecoach 4 days ago and unfold like a damn tree growing toward heaven, all 6'2" of her, with shoulders broad as a working man's and hands that could probably palm his whole head like a summer melon. Lord have mercy, the woman was magnificent and terrifying. Because standing there on his porch, watching her smile at him with such hope in her honey-colored eyes, Thad had realized he'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't some practical arrangement anymore. This was a woman, a real, flesh-and-blood, heartbreakingly beautiful woman, and he was going to have to figure out how to be a husband again, how to open up his boarded-up heart, how to risk everything when he was still convinced he wasn't enough. Those first 4 days had been torture. Magnolia moved through his house like she was trying to make herself smaller, shoulders hunched, voice quiet, always asking permission. It broke his heart watching this glorious woman try to fold herself into something manageable. But she was so capable it made his chest ache, fixed his broken gait, organized his disaster of a barn, made biscuits so light they practically floated. And every evening she'd sit by the fire reading Wordsworth poems in that deep, rich voice that did something strange to his insides. The wedding had been yesterday, simple and quiet, with just Preacher Dalton and his wife as witnesses. Thad had slipped the ring on Magnolia's finger, had to have it special made 3 sizes larger than any woman's ring the silversmith had ever crafted, and they'd shared an awkward kiss on the porch while Mrs. Dalton dabbed her eyes and whispered about what a lovely couple they made. But now it was their wedding night, and Thad was discovering that all his fear and grief and shame had followed him right into this bedroom, where his new wife stood in her white nightgown, with her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, looking vulnerable and hopeful, and so beautiful it hurt to breathe. Thad had changed into his nightshirt with shaking hands, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. He'd built up the fire, put fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, changed the sheets twice because he couldn't get them smooth enough. Done everything except figure out how to stop feeling like a fraud, like a boy playing at being a man, like someone who was about to disappoint this incredible woman in every possible way. When Magnolia had opened the bedroom door, Thad's breath had caught in his throat. She'd let her hair down, dark waves cascading past her shoulders, softening all those strong features. The lamplight made her skin glow warm like honey, and her eyes held something that looked dangerously close to tenderness, mixed with her own brand of fear. They'd stood there for a long moment, neither one knowing quite what to do. The air between them felt thick, charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Thad could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could smell the lavender soap she'd used, could see the way her hands were trembling just slightly at her sides. "Thad," she'd said softly, taking one step closer, "we don't have to rush nothing. If you ain't ready, we can just talk. Or, I want to," he'd interrupted, the words tumbling out too fast. I want you, He'd swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I don't know if I can be what you need, if I can be enough for a woman like you." That's when Magnolia had reached for him, those massive hands coming up to cup his face so gentle it made his eyes sting. And that's when Thad had seen what she was holding in her other hand. His breath had stopped completely. His whole body had gone rigid. Because there, gleaming in the lamplight, was his dead wife's locket, the one he'd buried in the back of his drawer 3 years ago because looking at it felt like swallowing glass. "Wait," the word had come out strangled. "You're putting that inside me?" His finger had shot out, pointing and trembling at the locket. Where did you? Magnolia's smile had been soft and knowing and filled with something that looked like understanding. "I found it when I was organizing your dresser yesterday," she had said quietly. "Saw Martha's picture inside, saw the inscription, 'To my gentle giant who holds my whole world in his hands.'" Thad had felt like the floor was falling out from under him. His eyes had gone wide with shock, his mouth hanging open, every defense he'd built crumbling. "Don't," he'd choked out. "Please don't make me—" "Listen to me." Magnolia's voice had been firm but tender. "This locket, this memory, this love you carry for Martha, I ain't asking you to put it away, Thad. I ain't asking you to forget her or pretend she didn't matter." She'd held the locket up between them, the delicate gold chain catching the light. "I'm asking you to let me put this beautiful, painful piece of your past inside your heart where it belongs, not hidden in a drawer like something shameful, not locked away like a wound you're too scared to touch." Thad's vision had gone blurry with tears. "I can't," he'd whispered, his voice breaking. "If I let myself feel it, if I let myself remember how much I loved her, how I killed her—" "You didn't kill her?" Magnolia had said it fierce, her eyes blazing. "You loved her. There's a difference, darling. And the fact that you're standing here terrified of loving again, that tells me you got a heart big enough and brave enough to handle this, to handle me, to handle all the beautiful, scary, overwhelming parts of letting someone in." The tears had started falling then, hot and unstoppable down Thad's cheeks. 3 years of grief he'd kept dammed up behind his ribs was suddenly pouring out, and he couldn't stop it, couldn't control it, could barely breathe through it. Magnolia had pulled him close, wrapped him up in her arms, and held him against her chest while he shook apart. One massive hand cradling the back of his head, the other pressed flat against his spine, holding him together when he felt like he was flying to pieces. And she'd whispered against his hair, "You were made to handle this, Thad. You were made to feel deeply and love fiercely and survive heartbreak and still have the courage to try again. That's what makes you man enough. Not your size, not your strength, your heart." Thad had clung to her like a drowning man, his fists twisted in her nightgown, his face buried against her shoulder, crying like he hadn't cried since the night Martha died. Great, gasping sobs that tore out of him like something living. And Magnolia had just held him, steady and strong and unshakable, letting him break down without trying to fix him or hush him or make him feel ashamed. When the worst of it had finally passed, when Thad could breathe again without his chest hitching, he'd pulled back just enough to look up at her. Her own eyes were wet with tears, her expression so tender it made his heart crack wider. "I'm scared," he'd admitted, his voice raw and honest. "I'm so damn scared of losing you, of not being enough, of failing you the way I failed Martha." "I know." Magnolia had brushed the tears from his cheeks with her thumbs. "I'm scared too. Scared you're going to wake up one day and realize you married a woman who's too big, too strong, too much. Scared I'm going to break you just by being myself." They'd stood there in the lamplight, both of them trembling, both of them raw and exposed and terrified. And somehow that shared fear had made everything shift. Because Thad had realized something in that moment that knocked the breath clean out of him. They were the same. Both of them convinced they were too much and not enough all at once. Both of them carrying wounds that made them scared to reach for what they wanted. Both of them standing on the edge of something beautiful and terrifying, trying to find the courage to jump. "You ain't gonna break me," Thad had said, his voice steadier now, "and I ain't gonna wake up regretting you. You want to know what I'm actually scared of?" He'd taken the locket from her hand, held it up between them. "I'm scared that if I let myself love you the way I'm already starting to, with everything in me, no holding back, that it'll be too much, that I'll drown you in it, that I'll need you so bad it'll suffocate you." Magnolia's breath had caught. "Thad, let me finish." He'd opened the locket, stared down at Martha's sweet face smiling up at him from the faded photograph, and for the first time in 3 years, looking at her didn't feel like swallowing glass. It felt like remembering someone precious, someone who'd want him to be happy. Martha was gentle and small and quiet. She needed protecting, needed someone to make her feel safe in a big, scary world. He'd closed the locket carefully, then reached up to fasten it around Magnolia's neck, his fingers clumsy but determined. "But you don't need protecting, Nola. You need someone who ain't scared of your strength, someone who'll let you be big and fierce and powerful without trying to shrink you down. And maybe I need someone who ain't scared of my softness, someone who won't think less of me for crying or being gentle or needing to be held sometimes." Magnolia had touched the locket resting against her chest, her eyes wide and shining. "You're giving this to me?" "I'm trusting you with it," Thad had corrected. "With her memory, with my grief, with all the broken, scared, tender parts of me I've been hiding because I thought they made me weak." He'd taken her face in his hands, his small hands against her strong jaw, and pulled her down until their foreheads touched. "You were right, Nola. I was made to handle this, to handle loving someone so much it terrifies me, to handle being vulnerable, to handle letting you see all of me, the parts I'm proud of and the parts I'm ashamed of, and trusting you won't use them against me." "Never," Magnolia had breathed, her voice fierce and tender all at once. "I'd never hurt you, Thad. I'd sooner cut off my own hands." "I know." And he had known, could feel it in his bones, in his blood, in the way she held him like he was something precious instead of something broken. "Now kiss me, kiss your husband, and then let me show you what it looks like when a man loves his wife without holding. Nothing back." She'd kissed him then, slow and deep and full of promise, kissed him until his knees went weak and his heart felt too big for his chest, kissed him until all the fear and shame and grief that had been choking him for 3 years started to dissolve, replaced by something warm and bright and terrifyingly wonderful. They'd moved toward the bed together, hands tangled, mouths still connected, both of them trembling but no longer from fear, from anticipation, from the sweet, scary knowledge that they were about to make themselves completely vulnerable to another person, and trust that vulnerability would be honored instead of exploited. When Magnolia's weight had come down on the bed frame, there'd been an ominous creak. They'd both frozen, eyes going wide. Then the creak had turned into a crack. Then the whole danged frame had collapsed with a sound like a gunshot, sending them tumbling to the floor in a tangle of quilts and limbs and startled laughter. Thad had landed on top of Magnolia, the first time in his adult life he'd ever been on top of anyone, and for a second they'd just stared at each other in shock. Then Magnolia had started laughing, deep, booming laughter that shook her whole body and made her eyes crinkle at the corners and sounded like pure joy. And Thad had started laughing too, laughing so hard his stomach hurt, laughing until tears were streaming down his face again, but this time from happiness instead of grief. "I'm so sorry," Magnolia had gasped between laughs. "I broke your bed." "Our bed," Thad had corrected, still grinning. and I don't give a damn about the bed." He'd looked down at her, his beautiful, magnificent, strong, tender wife, and felt his heart expand so big he thought it might burst right out of his chest. "I'll build us a stronger one tomorrow, one that can hold both of us and all our broken pieces and all our love, and still not break." "Tomorrow," Magnolia had agreed, pulling him down to her. "Love me first." So he had. There on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of his old bed and his old life and his old fears, Thaddeus Merriweather had loved his wife with everything in him, had been gentle when she needed gentleness and fierce when she needed fierceness, had let her be strong and powerful, and had let himself be soft and vulnerable. Had cried again, this time from overwhelming emotion instead of grief, and had held her while she cried too, both of them breaking open in the best possible way. Thad woke to golden sunlight streaming through the window and the feeling of being wrapped up in something warm and safe and impossibly right. He was tucked against Magnolia's chest, her massive arm curved around his back, her chin resting on top of his head. He could hear her heartbeat under his ear, steady and strong and real, could feel her breathing, deep and even with sleep, could smell the lavender soap on her skin mixed with something earthier, something that was just her. For the first time in 3 years, he'd slept through the night without nightmares, without waking up gasping and reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore, without that crushing weight of guilt and loneliness pressing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe. He should probably feel embarrassed about being held like this, like he was the smaller one needing protection, like he was something delicate that needed cradling. But Lord help him, he didn't. He felt safer than he'd ever felt in his entire life, felt like he'd finally found the one place in the world where he could be exactly who he was, scared and soft and strong and brave all at the same time, without having to apologize for any of it. Magnolia stirred, her arm tightening around him reflexive before her eyes fluttered open. For a second she looked confused, like she couldn't quite remember where she was. Then she looked down at him, and her whole face transformed, softened and warmed and lit up from the inside, like someone had just handed her everything she'd ever wanted. "Morning," she murmured, her voice rough with sleep and something deeper. "Morning, Mrs. Merriweather," Thad replied, and felt a thrill run through him at saying those words, at claiming her as his, at being claimed by her. Her smile went wide and bright, showing all her teeth. "Say it again." "What?" "My name, the new one." "Mrs. Merriweather," he said slowly, letting each syllable roll off his tongue like honey. "Magnolia Merriweather, my wife." "Lord, that sounds good." She shifted, rolling onto her side so they were face to face on the pile of quilts that had cushioned their fall. The broken bed frame lay scattered around them like the casualties of a beautiful war. "We really did destroy your furniture." "Our furniture," Thad corrected, reaching up to trace the line of her jaw with his fingertips. "And it was worth it. I'd break every piece of furniture in this house if it meant having you look at me the way you're looking at me right now." Something vulnerable flickered in her eyes. "How am I looking at you?" "Like I'm enough," he said quietly. "Like I'm exactly what you need. Like you can't quite believe your luck." He leaned in and kissed her softly. "That's how I'm looking at you too, by the way, in case you were wondering." A tear slipped down her cheek. Thad kissed it away, tasting salt and joy and the promise of forever. "I got something to tell you," Magnolia said, her voice going serious. "Something I should have told you before the wedding, but I was too scared you'd change your mind." Thad's heart kicked against his ribs. "What is it?" "I can't have children." The words came out fast, like she was ripping off a bandage. "Had the fever when I was 16. Doctor said it left me barren. I know you probably wanted a family, wanted babies, and I can't give you that. I understand if you—" He kissed her, cut off her words with his mouth, poured everything he was feeling into that kiss, all his love and acceptance and fierce protectiveness. When he finally pulled back, she was staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. "I don't need children," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I need you, just you, exactly as you are." He pressed his hand over her heart, felt it racing under his palm. "You think I'd trade having you, having this, for some fantasy of what our life should look like? Nola, I spent 3 years convinced I'd never love again, never feel safe again, never be whole again, and then you stepped off that stagecoach and changed everything." But what if you regret it later? What if you wake up in 5 years or 10 years and wish you'd married someone who could give you, he interrupted firmly. I'll wish I had you, which I do, and that's all I'm ever going to need. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her as much as he could, which wasn't much, given their size difference, but she melted into him anyway. We're going to build a life together, you and me. Maybe we'll adopt some orphans who need a home. Maybe we'll pour all our love into this ranch and the horses in each other. Maybe we'll just grow old together on this ridge, reading poetry by the fire and breaking furniture and being exactly who we are. And that'll be enough. More than enough. That'll be everything. Magnolia was crying now, great big tears rolling down her face, but she was smiling too. How'd I get so lucky, she whispered. How'd I end up with a man who sees me, really sees me, and don't run away scared? Same way I got lucky enough to end up with a woman who ain't scared of my softness, Thad replied. Sometimes God or fate or whatever you want to call it gets it right. Sometimes two broken people find each other and realize their broken pieces fit together perfect. They lay there in the wreckage of the bed, wrapped in each other in the morning light, and Thad thought about how 3 years ago he'd been certain his life was over, certain he'd never love again, never trust again, never be whole again. And now here he was, holding his wife, his magnificent, strong, tender, perfect wife, and feeling more alive than he'd felt in years, feeling like maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to be happy again, allowed to love without fear, allowed to be exactly who he was, gentle and emotional and tender-hearted, and have that be enough. 2 weeks passed like a dream. Thad built them a new bed, reinforced the frame with extra supports, made it big enough for Magnolia to stretch out comfortable, carved their initials into the headboard. They fell into an easy rhythm, working the ranch together during the day, reading poetry by the fire in the evenings, making love at night with increasing confidence and creativity. Thad learned every inch of his wife's body, learned what made her gasp and sigh and cry out his name, learned that strength and vulnerability could exist in the same person, in the same moment, learned that being held wasn't weakness, it was trust. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Big man, expensive suit, riding a horse that probably cost more than Thad made in a year. His face was red from the ride and something else, something mean and entitled and dangerous. "Where is she?" the man demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Thad's gut went cold. He set down the saddle he'd been mending and stood up slow, one hand moving instinctive toward the rifle he kept by the barn door. "Where's who?" "Don't play stupid, runt. Magnolia Thorngate. I tracked her to the stage depot, and the clerk said she came here to marry some nobody rancher." His lip curled. "That'd be you, I reckon." Everything clicked into place, the fine suit, the Georgia accent, the possessive rage rolling off him in waves. This was Jedediah, the man who'd tried to break Magnolia's spirit, the man who'd called her unnatural and monstrous and tried to make her ashamed of her strength. "The name's Magnolia Merriweather now," Thad said, keeping his voice level even though his hands wanted to shake. "She's my wife, legal and proper, so whatever business you think you got here, you don't." "The hell I don't." Jedediah dismounted, and even on foot he was imposing. Easily 6'4", broad-shouldered, the kind of man used to getting his way through size and intimidation. "She's mine. Been mine since we was 16. She just got confused, got scared. But I'm here to bring her home. Make this right." "Make what right?" Magnolia's voice cut through the air like a whip. Both men turned. She was coming from the house still wearing her work dress, her sleeves rolled up and her hair coming loose from its braid. She looked magnificent, she looked furious, and she was wearing Martha's locket around her neck, the symbol of everything Thad had trusted her with, everything they'd built together. "Baby," Jedediah started, his voice going smooth and manipulative. "Baby, I came all this way for you, to apologize, to bring you home where you belong." "I am home," Magnolia said, moving to stand beside Thad. Her hand found his shoulder, solid and sure and claiming. "And I ain't your baby, ain't been for near a year." "Magnolia, be reasonable. Look at you, look at him." Jedediah gestured dismissively at Thad. "He ain't even big enough to reach your chin. You think he can protect you, provide for you, satisfy you?" The last word dripped with ugly insinuation. "Come on now, we both know. You need a real man. Thad felt Magnolia's hand tighten on his shoulder, felt her whole body go rigid with rage. Before he could say anything, before he could even move, she was striding forward with purpose in every step. What happened next took maybe 3 seconds, but would be burned into Thad's memory forever. Jedediah reached for her, going to grab her arm, probably, force her to listen the way he'd probably forced her 100 times before. But Magnolia was faster. She caught his wrist mid-reach, twisted with practiced efficiency, and had the big man on his knees in the dirt before he could even register what was happening. Her other hand locked into his collar, holding him immobile with the kind of strength that came from years of being underestimated and learning to defend herself. "Let me tell you about my husband," she said, her voice gone deadly quiet in a way that made Thad's spine tingle. "He ain't the biggest man, ain't the loudest, ain't the kind what needs to throw his weight around to feel important." She tightened her grip, making Jedediah wince. "But he's got something you ain't never had and ain't never gonna have." "What's that?" Jedediah spat. "The strength to be gentle, the courage to be soft, the confidence to let me be exactly who I am without needing to break me down to build himself up." She leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "He's more man in his little finger than you are in your whole oversized, insecure body. He cries when he needs to cry and laughs when he needs to laugh, and loves me so fierce and honest it takes my breath away. And he ain't scared of none of it. Not my size, not my strength, not the fact that I could probably whip him in a fair fight if it came to that." "You're making a mistake." "No," Magnolia's voice went hard as iron. "The mistake was wasting 5 years on you. The mistake was believing you when you said I was too much, too big, too unnatural. The mistake was not seeing that you was just too small, not in body but in spirit, to handle a woman who wouldn't shrink herself to make you feel bigger." She released him with a shove that sent him sprawling in the dirt. "Now get off my land, and don't never come back. Next time I won't be so gentle." Jedediah scrambled to his feet, his face purple with rage and humiliation. He looked at Thad, then at Magnolia, then back at Thad. "You're welcome to her," he snarled. "You're gonna need her to fight your battles, little man." Thad walked forward slow and deliberate until he was standing right beside his wife. He wasn't scared, wasn't ashamed, wasn't nothing but proud of Magnolia for standing up for herself, proud of himself for not needing to prove anything, proud of what they'd built together in just 2 weeks of marriage. "You're right about one thing," Thad said quietly, his voice carrying clear across the yard. "I do need her. Need her strength and her courage and her fierce heart. Need her to challenge me and protect me and love me exactly as I am." He reached up and took Magnolia's hand, laced their fingers together, his small, hers large, fitting perfect. "But here's what you don't understand. Because you ain't never actually loved nothing in your life except your own reflection. Needing someone ain't weakness, it's trust, it's vulnerability. It's having the guts to say, I can't do this alone and I don't want to, and knowing the person standing beside you won't use that against you." He squeezed Magnolia's hand, felt her squeeze back just as tight. "That's what real partnership looks like," Thad continued. "That's what real love looks like. 2 people strong enough to need each other and brave enough to admit it. So yeah, I need my wife, and she needs me. And we ain't ashamed of neither one." He paused, let a small smile cross his face. "Now I believe my wife told you to get off our land. I'd suggest you listen. She's faster than she looks, and I'd hate for you to get embarrassed twice in one day." Jedediah stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, his whole body vibrating with impotent rage. Then he spat in the dirt, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. They watched him disappear over the ridge, watched until there was nothing left but dust settling in the afternoon sun. Then Magnolia turned and pulled Thad into her arms, held him so tight he could barely breathe. He wrapped his arms around her waist as far as they'd go and buried his face against her chest, right where Martha's locket rested over her heart. "Thank you," she whispered into his hair. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for not being scared of what we are together." "Thank you for teaching me I was allowed to be soft," Thad replied, "for showing me that gentleness is strength, for loving all the parts of me I thought made me weak." He pulled back just enough to look up at her face. "We're going to be all right, ain't we?" Better than all right, Magnolia promised, her eyes shining with tears and joy and absolute certainty. We're going to be extraordinary. And standing there in the Montana sunshine, wrapped in each other's arms despite all the ways the world said they shouldn't fit, they both knew it was true. Because sometimes the most unlikely pairings make the strongest bonds. Sometimes the smallest packages hold the biggest hearts. Sometimes the gentlest souls carry the fiercest love. And sometimes two broken people find each other in the wreckage and realize that being enough don't mean being perfect. It just means being willing to be loved exactly as you are, broken pieces and tender scars and all. Thaddeus and Magnolia Merriweather had found that kind of love. The kind that don't ask you to be bigger or smaller or different than you are. The kind that says, I see you, really see you, and I'm staying. The kind that makes you braver and softer and more yourself than you ever thought possible. And they was keeping it, protecting it, nurturing it. Building a life on this ridge where the wind never stopped howling but neither did the laughter, where broken bed frames was a badge of honor, where poetry got read by firelight and tears got shed without shame, and two souls who'd been told they was too much and not enough finally found a place where they was exactly right. That's the kind of love worth fighting for, worth trusting, worth opening your scarred heart for one more time, even when you're terrified it'll destroy you. Because maybe, just maybe, it'll save you instead. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in love that sees past size and strength to the tender truth underneath, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that might change the way you see the world. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our stories are reaching hearts all across this beautiful, broken world. Whether you're in Texas or Tennessee, Georgia, or Montana, Nigeria, or New York, we want to hear from you. What part of this story hit you hardest? When did you cry? When did you smile? Share your thoughts below, and let's build a community of people who believe that real love, the messy, imperfect, extraordinary kind, is always worth the risk.